You're out camping in the mountains above the Mojave Desert, doing a little prospecting, a little barbecue, maybe a little drinking. There's an earthquake, and the ground splits open, and something comes out you've never seen before. You reach for the whiskey or the Winchester. If you've been to the Mojave, you know one thing we have no shortage of is rocks. And where you have rocks, you have snakes. We have some of the most poisonous snakes in the world out here, and some get pretty big. And although I myself have never seen a snake over 5 feet long out here, there's been reports all through history of animals a lot longer than that. Some you might even call a monster. Outside of Los Angeles, above the small enclave of Azusa, lie the San Gabriel Mountains. And it was here, in 1906, that campers and tourists encountered and did battle with something they claimed was a giant snake monster. It was August when the Los Angeles Herald breathlessly reported that a giant serpent had left its lair and was seen moving down the river. Hundreds of shots had been fired at the creature as it swam along, but it was not killed or in fact even wounded. Being described as a huge snake-like reptile, about 30 feet long, its most defining characteristic was that it had wings. Yes, wings. Or at least what was described as 2 webbed, wing-like membranes that stuck out from its huge body for a distance of 10 feet on either side, and which it kept spread on the surface of the water as it swam along. The article further states that after the creature's original appearance, more campers and tourists flocked to the area. But other than 2 lucky prospectors, no one was able to see it again. The prospectors gave the best description of the creature. Along with finding of what they claimed was the monster's lair. A huge fissure or crack in the rocks deep in the mountains that had been opened by a recent earthquake. And even though apparently hundreds of people kept searching for it in the weeks to come, the monster serpent was never seen again, at least in the San Gabriel River. So what was it? Now, before we get to the idea of giant winged snakes, let's talk a little bit about the tradition of large reptiles in the American Southwest, because there is a history of it, and it really depends on which culture is reporting the phenomenon. In some, it's a real thing. In others, it's a mythological or spiritual animal. Let me explain. Among many Native American tribes, and indeed many ancient cultures around the world, the snake was not a symbol of evil or death. Quite the opposite. Although feared or respected, it was considered a creature with protective qualities. Something that knew the secret of life or immortality, as evidenced by the fact that it could shed its skin and be reborn each year. And out west, and in Central and South America, the winged serpent was a powerful being. And they left their mark. This article records that scientists had found evidence of giant snakes. But what they described were not actual skeletons or remains, but traces of giant snakes. Still to be found to this day, like this desert carving or intaglia showing a giant serpent still visible from the air, way out in the Mojave Desert. A common theory being that Native Americans placed these huge carvings on the ground near water supplies or sacred sites to guard them. But with the coming of the white man, and Western settlers' stories of fearsome and giant snakes, the stories continued. But again, with a modern sensationalist twist. Tales of cowboys having to kill or battle huge rattlesnakes or other reptiles filled the papers and campfire lore of the time. Newspapers fueled the belief. And one of my favorites was this story from 1934 about a town in California that was mourning the loss of their giant snake. One that had been kept in a sideshow for years, said to measure 34 feet long, weigh 358 pounds, and get this, my favorite part, the snake's name, Satan. So that brings us full circle back to where we began. The giant winged snake seen swimming down the San Gabriel River. What exactly was it, and was it ever seen again? So, what do we have to say about our 30-foot winged snake? Well, I think we can pretty much safely say that that's probably a little bit of an exaggeration. Now, there was something in the story that caught my eye. If you remember, the two prospectors, the men that got closest to it, described its, quote, wings as membranes that were floating on either side of its body on the water, that were thin and lace-like. Does that sound like maybe a snake that's shedding? Now, about 30 years ago, I had a pet python that was 15 feet long, and when she would shed, she would sometimes rub against something to try and roll her skin off like a sock. But other times, if it was dry, the skin would just shred, and she'd have these long shreds hanging off. And snakes will go into the water to try and moisturize that skin to peel it off easier. Could this have been a larger reptile, I don't know, 6 foot, 7 foot, 10 foot, that was in the water trying to shed, and people saw it and started shooting at it, and it got spun into a story by some newspaper man. And what about people shooting at it? Well, remember, this is a time when the idea of being out in the wild means you had to conquer nature, which kind of translated to shooting everything that moved. And I think what happened was maybe there was a large snake, people are drinking, they start shooting at it, and the newspaper decided to pick it up and run with it. So, what do you think? Large monster snake or a large load of newspaper droppings? I'm mlbehrman. I'll see you next time. Hey guys, if you're new to the channel, I invite you to subscribe. And if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help. Oh, and what's the biggest snake you've ever seen?